Hello, my name is Alex Sanfilippo, and I'm the founder of PodMatch, and I'm really excited to share with you how podcast guests can get the most out of PodMatch and beyond. If you're not using PodMatch, I'm going to do my best to make this valuable for you as well. I've got 4 main points to share with you, 4 ideas that will really help you maximize the amount of bookings you get so you can get interviewed more as a podcast guest. And again, I'll be using PodMatch as my example, but there are ways you can do it without PodMatch as well. I'll do my best to share that as much as I can throughout this. So first and foremost, my very first step I'm going to share is PodMatch related, but again, I'll make it valuable for everyone here. I'm actually going to share my screen here real quick, and I'm going to show you this is step 1, is how to maximize and max out your PodMatch guest profile. Now, if you're not using PodMatch, you still need to come up with some sort of profile, landing page, something that has all this information. And listen, the days of PDFs are behind us. First off, you really can't copy paste from a PDF. So that makes the job of the host much more difficult because they actually have to type everything out that they see, have to transcribe it, and they can't pull your pictures out of it. So you've got these really little pictures, and that just doesn't work. You need something that can be updated in real time and that host can use in a very flexible way. So PodMatch here, I'm going to show you what it has. And hey, if you're like, Alex, not using PodMatch, fine. Build your own page that's something like what I have here, because we have found that this is what podcast hosts want. We've interviewed thousands of podcasters to determine what they want from a guest. So I'll share all that with you here now. First off, I have a main profile picture, and this button here, that if you're not watching this, is a little icon that has like a video. If you click it, it will go straight to Alex. I'm not going to go into that right now, but basically a pitch video just so you can see my environment, see how I speak and stuff like that to make sure I might be a good fit. Also, here's my name, my title that I have. Below that, I have some tags because some hosts don't want to read, right? So I have some tags that are just really pointed to exactly what I talk about. I have my about, and I link out to more. So I try not to do too terribly much here. If someone really is interested in hearing my whole story, I've got a link to where they can read all of that. I've got my approved images. Now, I've got a close-up, which everyone wants, right? I've also got some with blank space on the side of it, which allows hosts to use that space to be able to put titles of the episode or key takeaways, quotes, and stuff like that. And hosts really seem to enjoy the pictures. I have all my social media links. I have my website link, and I also link to my podcast as well, which is very helpful, by the way. If you're a podcast host that's also a guest, you get booked a bit more because hosts know that you know the drill. So it's also very helpful. You should also indicate that you are a podcaster if you are one. If you're not a deal breaker, but just let people know that if you are. Next thing here is the actual introduction or the bio. This is what hosts are going to read when the interview is getting started. Mine is very short. It's a single paragraph, and it all flows coherently and explains exactly what it is that I'm going to want to be talking about anyway. I encourage you, spend time on the introduction. I'll have some links below to some resources on that so that you can really make sure that you're maximizing this. And then we have the call to action. So this is where you want podcast hosts to send their listeners. And typically, they give you the chance to do this, right? The host will say, Alex, where can listeners find out more about you? This is what you're describing for a host to know that you're going to say, or so that they can share it as well and reinforce it. And so I have a very pointed call to action, and it's great for hosts to know that up front because they can position parts of the conversation to kind of add value to that. So you don't want to just be a shot in the dark. Next thing here is to have some ideas for the title, the main focus, right? You want to basically give people like, oh, this could actually be a really good title for this episode. Next, you want to have some questions that you're ready to answer. And not like, how did you get into business? Why did you decide to do this, right? Like, make them go a little bit deeper. Make them be actual insightful questions. Here's the thing. No hosts are going to use your exact title ideas, and they're not going to use the questions exactly, but it gives them a framework to know what to follow. The next thing that I include also is links to previous interviews I've done that I consider to be really good interviews. We're able to go hear you as a guest to know how you're going to show up. And the last thing here, which PodMatch does, and it's really hard to do off of PodMatch, but there's actual reviews from podcast hosts that have had me on their show. At time of recording, I have 129 different podcast hosts who have left me, it looks like all of them have left me a 5-star review. And you can go through all those and see what they said and stuff like that. That adds a lot of credibility. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And I'm going to move on to the next point here. But real quick, again, that's number 1. That's to max out your PodMatch profile. Here's the thing. A singular focus is always what wins. So don't leave any blank space, right? Fill out everything, but not just with filler. Reinforce the point. If you looked at what I was just sharing, you notice I only talk about podcasting. That's the only thing I talk about. You know what? I did 15 years in aerospace. Productivity is probably what I'm best at. I actually used to run some leadership things, right? I used to do some coaching. This stuff is not included in there because it's not what I'm talking about right now. If I would be like, I was in aerospace, I did this, I did this, I did this, right? And you put all that in your profile, you're now going to confuse a host with the direction that you want them to take the conversation in. Does that make sense? Right? You're going to tell them, hey, go anywhere because nothing's off limits. And there's often where guests are like, man, I wish hosts would only talk about this. I'm like, well, that's your fault. You told them, ask me any of these 100 things, and they're going to ask you all those 100 things probably. So again, first and foremost, maximize the profile. Don't take shortcuts. Don't say, I'll add this later. None of that stuff goes over well for hosts. And also make sure it's a singular focus because that is really how you win. That's point number one. Point number two is to do the outreach. We get out of life and business what we put into it. And so many of us, we want to sit back and be like, okay, I did a good job on my profile, or I made this landing page of my own because I'm not using PodMatch. I'm just going to wait, see who shows up. I hate to break it to you, no one's going to show up. And I don't say that to be rude, but the days of hosts reaching out to guests are rapidly coming to an end. Hosts have options, lots of them. And it's because people are reaching out to them. Their pipeline is full of people putting their name in the bucket, right? Saying, hey, add me to your list of people that you want to consider to be on the podcast. If you're not adding yourself to their list, you're probably not going to get invited. A great example is I had somebody who's actually famous. They're I consider them A-list in the leadership in business sector. They joined PodMatch and they did not do this, even though I told them to. And they said that they were really mad at me. We got in a call and he's like, dude, PodMatch does not work. And I was like, you're wrong. I'm like, explain to me why it doesn't work. He goes, no one has reached out, or he said 3 hosts have reached out to me in my first week on there. He goes, that's ridiculous. Like, why is it only 3? I was like, how about you and your team try reaching out to a host and just see what happens? The next week he called me on the phone and said, hey man, I owe you an apology. He goes, I have been booked on 150 shows in 1 week. It's just because he was willing to do the outreach. Now, that is not a typical result, right? Again, he is A-list, one of the biggest names in leadership. But the point is, hosts don't know unless you reach out. Be willing to put in the work. Do the outreach. Takes a level of humility, which is really healthy for all of us to have, right? Be willing to do the outreach. Be willing to put in the work. You get out of it what you put into it. That's with PodMatch or anything else in life and work. Be willing to put in the effort. Number 3, next point here is make sure your pitch is good. We live in a day where AI pitching is on the rise. But hosts are learning to see right through it. If you send me an AI pitch, I'm pretty much going to press the pass button on PodMatch and just not even respond because you didn't actually say anything to me. My stance on AI, which I do hope becomes very widely accepted, but I'm fighting a major uphill battle with this, is that AI should never be used in human-to-human conversation or contact of any type. Yes, if you want an AI blog post, fine. If you want titles and descriptions for different things, sure, that's perfectly fine, right? But the actual interaction, Alex talking to someone else, I should never have AI interject with that because it takes me out of the equation. People are very smart. Doesn't take us long to adapt to understand this was AI generated. So first and foremost, don't use AI for your pitch. Right there, that's going to make you, like in the next year, you will be a standout guest just by doing that one thing, by not doing what everyone else is doing. Number 2 is don't have a template. Now, you might have a framework, but not a template where you just change the name, because here's what's going to happen. Like happened to me today. A host forgot a guest reached out to me as the host, and forgot to change the name. So they said, hey, Alan, and they're like, I would love to be a guest on your podcast. I'm like, hey, was this for me? And they're like, oops, sorry. Yes, it was for Alex, not for Alan. That was somebody else. All they were doing is changing the name. Or we've all seen it. Hosts have all seen this, where it says, hey, insert name, your podcast is amazing, right? It's like, okay, you didn't even take time to put in my name. You said it's just insert name on it. You forgot to do it, right? The way you do a good pitch, and I will have a link to this below, is 5 steps. Lead with value, make a meaningful request, offer credibility, mention sharing the episode if you're really willing to, and make it easy for the host to say no. You're just trying to start the conversation. That's an overview of it. Below, I'll have a link to that in far more detail. You can listen to it. You can read it. It's exactly how I pitch, and I get accepted by over 70% of hosts that I reach out to. It doesn't matter the size or where they are, right? It can be the host that has 10 people listening. I've also reached out to hosts that have multiple millions of people listening every week, and same thing, same acceptance rate across the board, because it works, because it's human, because no one's willing to do it, right? So put in the effort, not just with doing the outreach, but also with doing a good job on the pitch. Every time I pitch to be a guest on a podcast, it takes me about 45 minutes, right? You might be able to send 45 pitches out in 45 minutes, but I bet you're only getting a 1% conversion. I'm getting 70%. I'm doing better, right? And I don't say it to be rude or mean. We just have to be willing to understand that what you get into, what you put into is what you're going to get out of it. So again, number 3 is to make your pitch really good. And number 4, my final point here, and a lot of people skip this one who get everything else right, it's to follow up. To be willing to do the follow-up. Now, what this means is if you're using PodMatch, yes, Send a follow-up message a week later. We have read receipts. You can see if they even read it. If they haven't, maybe they're on vacation, right? We have away messages in there as well. So maybe you got an away message. But the way you do a proper follow-up is you find where that person is most active and you contact them through their preferred method, not yours. All the time I have people be like, well, Alex, I tried doing the outreach or the follow-up thing like you told me to. I'm like, well, where'd you reach out? Instagram. I'm like, send me their Instagram account. They haven't posted on here in 3 years. They're not using Instagram. Like, it's falling on deaf ears, right? Like, no one is actually there to check that. They don't care. And you might say, okay, well, they post on LinkedIn every day. Did you reach out there? No, I don't really like LinkedIn. Cool. You're never going to hear from that host if you don't reach out where they are. Now, eventually they all check PodMatch. So if you're willing to wait a little bit, fine. I get accepted by people that I reached out to months ago sometimes. Right? It's been like 3 months and they finally like, hey, sorry, I was on vacation, but I'm back. I'm looking for a guest. Would love to have you on. Right? But if you want to start building a relationship, start engaging with them where they are, not where you want to be. If you want to be accepted as a guest, you need to meet them where they are, the way that they like to be communicated with. The other thing is if they're doing like tons of like selfie videos all the time, send them a video follow-up. They clearly like that type of interaction because they're doing it, right? If they don't do that, don't freak them out and send them a video when they only ever write text and there's not even pictures anywhere, right? You want to make sure that you meet them where they are, how they are. So again, to give you a quick overview of these 4 things, once again, number 1 is to max out your profile. Make it really good. Singular focus wins. Number 2, do the outreach. We get out of it what we put into it. Number 3, make your pitch really good because it will make you stand out. And number 4, be willing to follow up wherever those hosts are spending their time. If you do these 4 things, I promise you, you will get results as a podcast guest. And this is how you can get the most out of PodMatch and beyond. Even if you're not using it, this stuff will work. So again, my name is Alex Sanfilippo, and I hope this was really helpful for you today.